Please call me by my true name, so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can feel how my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true name, so I can heal, and the door of my heart can be left open. May the door of our hearts be left open.
It is an insane delight, honor, and pleasure to be with you all today as part of this special summer program, and together with this gorgeous Unique Self Symphony, and especially with my beloved Dharma sister Jacqueline to guide us through today's service. It is also a new and exciting experience for me, and I believe for both of us, to be on this side of the camera. And I have to admit that I am a bit camera shy. So it is pretty exciting for me to be here today. Thank you, Dr. Marc Gafni, for this invitation, which is a great honor and privilege. In today's episode, I have the honor to set part of the framework, hopefully clarifying a couple of the words we're using here, while Lady Jacqueline will then bring it all back into our personal experience and everyday practices. Before we start, I would like to say a couple of words, especially for the new people, about the unique language we are using here. We are actually trying to create new language in two distinct ways. First, by giving new and fresh meaning to existing words. For example, we are using the words God or religion or intimacy in new, exciting ways. And whenever we do so, we are trying to point to the new meaning of these words. Second, by actually creating new words, not as a kind of jargon in a regressive way, like a cult would be doing it, in order to exclude people who do not know this language, but in an evolutionary way, as the old language does not fully capture the new emergent meaning we are pointing to. Words like this are, for example, unique self, outrageous love, Homo Amor, which is the fulfillment of Homo sapiens, or unique self symphony. We are actually weaving a new tapestry of meaning together. Every word is filled with layers upon layers of depth, rooted in the exterior and interior sciences, and emerging from the amazing work Dr. Marc has been doing over the past decades. And if you are new here, while we are totally trying to always explain every word we are using, please give yourself some time to fully grasp this new language. It will reveal more and more of its depth over time. And with that, let's begin. We are just back from our 10th Outrageous Love Festival, which, at least for me, has been one of the highlights of every one of the last 10 years. Although each of these festivals was unique and had its own topic, the overarching theme of all these festivals together has been, how do we respond to what we call the meta crisis? Both with a new story of value based on evolving first principles and first values, as well as with our own transformation to what we call Homo Amor. As Dr. Marc Gafni has said many times, we are in a time between stories, both collectively or culturally and personally. And crises are our evolutionary drivers. That is true for us as a culture, and it is certainly true for me. Over the last 2 years, I went through my own crisis, actually the second big crisis of my life. And in that, I was able to both deepen my understanding of these gorgeous teachings that I have devoted my life to, my practice and embodiment of them, as well as the way I work and collaborate with Dr. Marc and the team. So although it hasn't been exactly easy, I am extremely grateful and happy for that crisis. And I truly hope that we as humanity will be at some point grateful for all the lessons we have learned from the meta crisis that we are facing together right now. That will be the time when we have finally overcome the polarization we are in culturally and have started to truly self-identify as Homo Amor. That is why the name of today's presentation is The Fierce and Tender Journey of Homo Amor, Or we could also call it dharmic distinctions as a path from polarization to paradox and beyond. So what do we mean by that? I have had the privilege of studying and working with Dr. Marc Gafni since 2011. And I believe it was in 2014 when it first occurred to me that his gorgeous teachings are actually based on a brilliant set of distinctions. It was through courses with Landmark that I had first become aware of how distinctions create our world. In their language, to distinguish something means to take something from an undifferentiated background and bring it to the foreground. So it is not only that we distinguish between two things that are kind of the opposite of each other, for example, between ego and unique self, but we also distinguish something from nothing, foreground from background, so that for the first time we can point to something and give it a name. For example, by defining intimacy in a new way, like Dr. Marc has done in his intimacy formula as shared identity in the context of relative otherness. So we share an identity, a we, while not losing our own unique identity. Times mutuality of recognition, we recognize each other. Times mutuality of pathos, we feel each other. Times mutuality of values, we have shared values and can therefore trust each other. Times mutuality of purpose, we stand for a shared purpose or cause. Intimacy begins to appear in a new way, both in our lives, but also in the cosmos. We literally begin to see it everywhere, from elementary particles making love to each other up to us. It was about the same time as I was thinking about this when Marc started to teach about core mimetic structures. The word meme was originally coined by Richard Dawkins in his book, The Selfish Gene. We could say that memes are for cultural inheritance what genes are for biological inheritance. While genes are transmitted through sex, memes are transmitted through stories and cultural narratives, which is exactly one of the reasons why we say that we need a new story. And it occurred to me that these memes were also based on sets of distinctions. So I started to discuss that insight with Marc, and he told me that it was, of course, already built into the Dharma. For example, in the creation myth of Genesis, God is making distinctions. God distinguishes between light and darkness, day and night, heaven and earth. So this whole myth is not about the history of planet Earth, but about the way creation happens anytime and everywhere. Even scientifically, all that happened after the Big Bang is reality making more and deeper distinctions. Wavicles, distinguished at different moments as waves and particles with different qualities, and then integrating these qualities into larger and more complex entities, atoms, molecules, cells, etc., with ever new qualities. The way we perceive anything is by seeing distinctions, light and dark, different colors, tastes, etc. Distinctions work a bit like these 3D images where we only perceive a sea of colors at first. But then when we gaze at them for a time and relax our focus, all of a sudden an image jumps out of the picture. That image or text or whatever it is was there all along as part of the background. But then it jumps out and becomes the foreground where we are able to see and distinguish it. That is what distinctions do. We distinguish something that was always there but hiding in the background. And once we have distinguished it, we cannot not see it anymore. It becomes part of our reality. We begin to see it all the time. Quite often, these distinctions come with their own seemingly polar opposites. A or not A, black or white, something or nothing. But that is only so at first sight. On a deeper level, distinctions are part of dialectical triangles, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Let's look at a couple of examples from the Dharma. One of the Dharmic distinctions Marc has made is the distinction of unique self. Most traditions have an understanding of the difference between ego and true self. Ego is personal, special, and separate. True self is impersonal, same, that is not special, and all one. So the Eastern Enlightenment traditions claim that ego or separateness is the cause of all suffering. So in order to overcome suffering, we need to give up our ego, which includes both our separateness and our specialness, in order to become true self, one with the all. The Western Enlightenment traditions, on the other hand, claimed that our sense of being special is the cause of all human dignity. So we should never get rid of our dignity, of the dignity of our individuality, our specialness, because doing so has led to so many of the atrocities that all too often happened in the name of religion. Now, here comes Dr. Marc. Unique self enters stage left. There is actually a way of perceiving ourselves as being both one with the all and absolutely special, even unique, and therefore of having ultimate dignity, unique self. Like our arms are totally unique and special while still being part of the same body. That means that we can let go of our separateness while being totally special and unique. Wow. Thesis, I am special and distinct at the level of ego, and antithesis, I'm all one at the level of true self, integrate into the synthesis. I am an irreducible unique self, a unique expression of true self, of the all. Wow. The same happens again at an even higher level. There's the distinction between being and becoming. What would be the synthesis of that? If we combine the being of true self that lives in us with the becoming of the evolutionary impulse that also lives in us, which are both impersonal, and incarnate those together with the absolute special personalness of unique self, evolutionary unique self appears. I am evolution, but I am a unique and personal expression of evolution. Wow. A second example, let's take the distinction between ordinary love and outrageous love that Marc has made. Ordinary love is our understanding of love in mainstream culture. It is personal and often a strategy of the ego. It is small. Some contrast that with the notion of absolute love that is unconditional, timeless, and impersonal. Outrageous love, on the other hand, transcends and includes both ordinary love and absolute love. It is strong. It is the underlying force of the entire universe and of evolution, while simultaneously being totally personal. As Dr. Marc Gafni has said, the difference between ordinary love and outrageous love is like the difference between a very large number and infinity. A few more examples that Jacqueline will deepen in her part. The clash between being totally independent and totally dependent resolves in interdependence. The clash between autonomy and communion resolves in intimacy. That is, remember, shared identity in the context of relative otherness, which is exactly where Homo Amor lives. The clash between masculine and feminine qualities, or what we call here line and circle qualities, resolves at a higher level where those qualities interpenetrate each other to love the moment open. Fierce self-discipline and tender self-love come together in the devotion that lives in Homo Amor. This really hit home for me in that second big crisis of my life, when I had to literally learn how to love myself in a whole new way. Not the superficial self-love that is somehow about pampering ourselves, but a tough love at times that includes fierce self-discipline and the most tender devotion to my own evolutionary unique self. One of the places where I can practice this daily is in my Kundalini yoga practice that teaches me to both listen to my body in a new way and to keep going when the going gets tough. There is a clear distinction, for example, between a sharp pain that helps me to stop and be gentle with my body and a somewhat dull pain that, if I go beyond it, often transforms into the most blissful pleasure. As Dr. Marc Gafni so often reminds us, as Homo Amor, as evolutionary unique selves, we need to become comfortable with our discomfort. So let's feel into this for a moment and follow me, if you like, into a brief exercise. Put all the fierceness you can find in yourself into your right hand, the power to set clear boundaries, to say yes or no, to restrict yourself, but also the discipline to push through if needed. Hold it there. At the same time, put all the tenderness you can find in yourself into your left hand, the softness in you, the gentleness, the surrender to the moment, the yes to your deepest devotion to play a larger game, but from a totally tender place. Hold it there. Now, breathe deeply, all the way in and out. Feel the tension between your two hands and slowly begin to move them together. Feel how the two hands and the two qualities merge. Let them dance. Feel them in your whole body. And then feel into our final example, the clash between living in the now, the present moment, and living in the wounds of the past or the fearful anticipation of the future, getting lost there somehow, resolves in the eternity that lives in the now, in which we can find both our memory of the past and follow the past, the call to heal the past, and the memory of the future and follow the call to co-create that future. Thank you all so much for being with me today. And with that, I give my word over to you, beloved David, to resonate today's code.
Thank you, Kerstin. Welcome, everyone. This is an evolutionary community. So Kerstin so beautifully actually provided distinctions that don't separate, but integrate and weave at a higher level. So that's what we're doing here. We're actually weaving reality, separate parts, and bringing them to larger wholes as part of the evolutionary process. So I'm about to resonate the code, and the code actually consolidates the theme, the topic, the principles of today, and so that we can actually focus on it. So here's this week's evolutionary love code. I'll just put it in the chat box. Oops, there we go. So you can resonate it with me. The past, present, and future are first principles and first values of reality. The past calls us, the present calls us, and the future calls us. We are called by our past self, by our present self, and our future self. Unique self incorporates all three. Each call has a shadow expression and each has a light expression. Homo Amor, the fulfillment of Homo sapiens, responds to the call of the past, the call of the present, and the call of the future in every instant of external time. Responding to only one or two of these calls actually generates distortion. Clarity and sacred power only emerge from the full response of this holy trinity of past, present, and future calls. So with that resonance, I turn my word to you, beloved Jacqueline.
Thank you so much, David, for that wonderful resonating of the code. And before we start, I'd just like to say my own personal thank you to Dr. Marc for trusting me to be here today, taking my turn with my beautiful sister, Kerstin. And I'd also just like to say that it feels pretty strange to be on this side of the camera. Usually I'm tucked away in the back doing unseen things, but here I am. So here we are in the fierce and tender journey of Homo Amor. Homo Amor being, of course, the new human and the new humanity, the evolution of Homo sapiens. And what I'd like to do is dive into the experience and practice of Homo Amor. We shall be looking at how we are called to our greatness by our past self, our present self, and our future self. And I will share some of my own journey with you, my journey to the self-recognition of my own innate wholeness. A few snapshots from my sacred autobiography, if you will. And this is the journey that we are all on. The journey to the new human, evolutionary, unique self, Homo Amor, who feels it deeply within themselves, within the very, very cells of their being, that they are the leading edge of evolution, that we are an embodied experience of being lived by love as love, not merely as a separate self, but as part of the actual field of love, with the realization that, yes, I affect that field. I'm causing that field. I am an individuated expression of the whole, a unique self. I am radiant. I am shining. I have never lived before and I will never live again. I am the leading edge of 13.7 billion years of evolution. Wow, how's that? So one of the things I'd like to do is to point out here that one of our core practices that we have in becoming Homo Amor is to begin to tell our own story about moving through the selves, from separate self to true self, to unique self, to evolutionary unique self. So as I speak, this might be something you'd like to consider. It might be something you might feel drawn to do at a later date. So I am going to start with the story of Hansel and Gretel. And I have been assured that even the people in America know the story of Hansel and Gretel. So here goes. So I'm sure you'll all remember that in the fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel leave a trail of breadcrumbs so that they can find their way back home. But of course, in the story, the birds have eaten the breadcrumbs and they can't find their way back home. But for us, I'm really pleased to say the breadcrumbs are still there, waiting to be discovered. The breadcrumbs are the call of the future. These are the signposts on our journey, and they litter both our past and our present. But there's one huge difference. These breadcrumbs take us forward, not backwards. We evolve, we never return. The past, the present, and the future are always ever present in our life. Our past self calls us to do the work that is necessary in order to evolve. And the thing is not to get stuck in the story of our brokenness. As Dr. Marc says, we are inherently good, not innately good. And we have to do the work. We have to wake up, we have to grow up, and we have to show up. Our present self calls us to be fully present in the present moment. The present moment can only be fully experienced, fully blown open when we bring all of our focus, all of our attention, and we live there with full audacity. And the thing about the present is not to get sucked into a sort of, oh, what can I call it? A kind of blissful inertia, maybe, where we get seduced by true self, which is the oneness with the all, which is absolutely beautiful. Of course it is, but it's not the end of the story. There's actually more than that. And then our future self calls us forward. It calls us forward to everything that we can be, to our wholeness, to Homo Amor. So there are actually many doorways through which I could enter, but the one through which we are going to go is the one that has actually been the most significant in my own life, which is the doorway of autonomy and communion. And my journey to holding these polarizations in dialectical tension, you remember the triangles that Kerstin talked about, as Homo Amor. So autonomy on one side, communion on the other, with intimacy, ecstasy, Homo Amor at the top. So a little bit of sharing. I was born into a family where, to, I must admit, my childhood eyes, one parent was the embodiment of autonomy and independence. And here there was the energy of thrust, of movement, of division and power. Although I must say it wasn't really power in its true sense, it was power in the sense of power over. And my personal experience with my other parent was that they embodied communion, dependence, submission. There was an abdication of power, to my mind. All of what we might call the circle energy was concentrated here. Holding, nurturing, enfolding, the wetness of opening, receiving the softness of the breast, the quivering tenderness of embrace. And you know what? I found both totally overwhelming. I yearned for closeness with the parent who was distant. I felt unloved and I felt unseen. And I believed that I was at fault. I tried to contort myself into shapes that I thought would make me lovable. I denied my own essential nature. I felt unacceptable. But at the same time, I was trying desperately to keep at bay the other parent because I felt that I would be swamped by what I experienced as their neediness. So I shut down, I withdrew, I hid. And I actually became very adept at being the queen of pretense. But it was exhausting. I had no energy and I had no motivation for life, not surprisingly. And along the way, I'm sure you'll realize that I'd actually rejected my power and I'd rejected intimacy. So there wasn't much left, was there, to be honest? And I sort of questioned what was the point of it all. So my experience was that everything was polarized. But through the practice of mythologizing my story rather than pathologizing it, I now realize that I had the perfect parents, the parents that I needed to draw me forward into being my unique self. And that nothing, as Dr. Marc says, nothing is a mistake, nothing is an error. Everything is perfect. And I'd also like to really point out that my childhood experience was interpreted through myself as I was as a child. So at that point, there was no way I could be aware of my parents' wholeness. It was what I could see was what I thought was the whole of them. So this isn't about denigrating my parents. It's actually about saying this was my experience. And the interesting thing is that if you spoke to either of my siblings, one had a completely different experience and one had a somewhat different experience, which I think highlights that we all have our own realities in some way. And yet, in the midst of all this, the breadcrumbs were there. Remember, we talked about the breadcrumbs, the call of the future. So when I look back, I can actually find the calls of the future that were there all along, embedded in my past. And one such call of the future was really, I think, the innate knowing that I had that somehow these opposing energies needed to be balanced. So in the only way I could as a child, I tried to do it out there. I became a master of manipulation and control. I tried to change my behavior to elicit the response I wanted from a particular parent. But not surprisingly, I'm just going to say this failed miserably. And I didn't realize at that point that the work actually needed to take place within me, that it wasn't about doing the work out there. It wasn't about manipulation and control. It was actually about work within myself. And I'd also like to point out that I was living as a victim. I wasn't living as a player. I was cut off from my feelings. I was in unbearable pain, trying to do things the only way I knew, and I was actually in limbo. And the other call from the future was, for me, this intense yearning that I've always had. I knew that this wasn't how life should be. And I always yearned for more. There was something in the air. There was like a lingering fragrance. It's the only way I can describe it. of something barely remembered. Well, actually not really remembered, but almost remembered. It was like, I just knew that there was more than this, a gentle whisper, sometimes sort of saying, yes, 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 you're right. But I didn't know what to do with it. So what I'd like to do now is pause just for a moment or two and ask you, my beautiful people who are listening to this, whether you might actually be able to identify a call from the future in your life, maybe something from the past or something from the present. And if you do, it would be absolutely great if you'd like to share it in the chat box. And then what I'll do is just read a few out. So if that works, and if you actually can't think of anything, which is great too, because sometimes when we're put on the spot, we can't, maybe it's something you'd like to reflect upon afterwards. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So, Kerstin, one of my calls from the future, says Kerstin, I always felt an extremely deep and painful yearning to wholeness, oneness, and integration, which led me on the spiritual path to integral theory. And finally, Dr. Marc. Thank you, Kerstin. Becca says, the call to the future, the cree of the red tail circling overhead. How beautiful is that? Krista. My call from the future shared visions of my greatness and said, this is who you are meant to be. So you see, wow, it's really, really true. When we look, we can find these calls. And Colleen says, no bird flies too high that flies on its own wings. Jonathan Livingston's Seagull changed my life. Yes, I remember that book too. Lynn, the call to wed the divine. Anne-Marie, the call visionary. And one more, Carol, the call to notice and let myself surrender to be. And just one more, Tom, I'm called to have the book on unique self-practices that Dr. Gafni and I are co-authoring published before the end of the year. So how beautiful is that? Thank you all so much for sharing. I feel quite enlivened by your sharings. So I'm thinking you actually get the picture that I've shared. I was called by the future, but I was unable to make sense of the call at that time. There was just a lot of work to be done. And the work was actually, first of all, I needed to open. I needed to feel, and I needed to feel it all. I needed to allow it all in. And the paradox is that it was only when I allowed the pain, the unbearable pain to penetrate me fully, that I was able to experience all the pleasure. I mean, I'd always kept pain at bay. It was too painful to go there. The pain of the world was overwhelming. But as Dr. Marc says, the opposite of pain, the opposite of pleasure is not pain. It's being comfortably numb. And I mean, yes, I will agree, I was numb. It wasn't very comfortable, but I was numb. And the paradox is that once I opened to the pain, then I could experience all the pleasure. And it was only then that I could begin to access my full radical aliveness in the present. And that, of course, is the third. I also needed to claim my tenderness and my fierceness. All the line qualities that we talked about and all the circle qualities, I had to allow my quivering tenderness and my radical thrust, my aliveness, my drive, my power. I had rejected power, seeing only power over, but I needed to claim true power, and I needed to learn to surrender from a place of power, and I needed to open to intimacy. I needed to do all these things within myself so that I could actually bring all these opposing qualities together into the third that is Homo Amor. And I actually have a little secret for you. And that is, if we do that, then miracles happen. Our relationships can become transformed. Once I stopped resenting my parents for not being able to love me in the way I thought I needed them to, I actually began to be able to love them for who they actually are. I was able to see them in their wholeness for the first time in my life. I was able to feel into what shaped them, their parents and their grandparents, the actions back through the generations. And there was a home for me. I began to locate myself in the great chain of being. And I also realized that they had never felt desired or loved, adored, needed, chosen, or intended, or recognized. And what struck me was that actually I could offer this to them. So instead of residing in the past and because you didn't love me the way I wanted to, I actually went from what can I get to what can I give, which was just the most beautiful thing. And I can only say that all relationships can transform in this way. And isn't that just the most beautiful thing out? It's almost like, if you want to put it another way, once I knew my true name, I could begin to call them by their true name. And there's actually a beautiful, beautiful song. I'd just like to read you some of the words. Please call me by my true name, that I can hear my cries and laughters are one, so I can feel that joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true name, so that I can wake up and the doors of my heart will be left open. And with that, I'd like to finish here, and I'd like to hand over to my beautiful, wonderful Dharma sister, Krista, who will sing this absolutely beautiful song for us. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Thank you all.
My joy is like spring, so warm, it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true name, so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can feel how my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true name, so I can feel, and the door of my heart can be left open. Please call me by my true name, so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can feel how my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true name, so I can heal, and the door of my heart can be left open. May the door